The desert wind cut through the air like shattered glass, carrying grains of sand that stung exposed skin and turned the world into a shimmering haze of copper and gold. Each gust whispered in a language older than civilization, promises written in bone and blood across a wasteland that had swallowed countless souls before these men arrived. The southwestern American desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of bleached skeletal remains and broken dreams painted in shades of rust and amber. Here, where the earth cracked like dried lips, and the sun burned with the fury of something vindictive and alive, a team of Navy SEALs trudged through what was supposed to be their final day of advanced combat training. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow, tasting salt and grit on his cracked lips. At 42, the veteran had seen action in 3 different theaters of war, had pulled triggers that ended lives and made decisions that saved them. But this desert held a particular kind of menace that crawled under his skin and nested there. It wasn't the heat, though the temperature had soared past 115 degrees. It wasn't even the isolation, though they hadn't seen another living soul for 72 hours. It was the silence, the absolute, suffocating silence that made every heartbeat sound like thunder and every footstep echo like gunfire in his skull. The kind of quiet that turned a man's thoughts against him. Behind him, 7 men moved in practiced formation, their gear weighing heavy on shoulders already burdened by exhaustion. 6 days they'd been pushing through this hellscape, simulating real combat conditions and terrain that could kill the unprepared in a matter of hours. Each man carried 40 pounds of equipment, enough water for 18 hours if rationed properly, and enough ammunition to fight their way out of hell itself. Yet something felt different today. Something in the air, in the way the shadows fell, in the particular quality of the heat shimmer that danced across the distant mountains like spirits rising from the earth. The training exercise was supposed to test their limits, to push them beyond what they thought possible and forge them into something harder than the desert stone beneath their boots. Command had selected this location specifically for its brutal conditions and complete isolation. No civilians for 50 miles in any direction, no cell towers, no roads, no easy extraction points. Just raw, unforgiving wilderness that had claimed the lives of countless travelers over the centuries, their bones now part of the landscape's terrible architecture. Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison adjusted his tactical vest and checked his watch. 1,500 hours. They were right on schedule to reach the extraction point by 1800, just as the desert began its nightly transformation from furnace to freezer. The temperature would drop 40 degrees once the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and hypothermia would become as real a threat as heat stroke. In this place, survival depended on 2 things: respect for the environment and absolute trust in your teammates. The team moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, each man aware of his position relative to the others, each scanning his assigned sector for threats that shouldn't exist but somehow felt omnipresent. Their boots left shallow impressions in the sand, temporary marks that would be erased by the next gust of wind. Nothing lasted here. Nothing except the bones of those who had underestimated the desert's power. 23-year-old Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison brought up the rear, his young eyes constantly sweeping the landscape behind them. This was his first major exercise with the team, and he carried the weight of proving himself to men who had seen more combat than he had birthdays. His hands were steady on his weapon, but sweat made his palms slick inside his gloves despite the cooling fabric. The desert had a way of making even experienced operators question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Chief Petty Officer Michael Rodriguez, the team's sniper specialist, moved with particular caution. His trained eye caught details others missed. The way certain shadows fell, the patterns wind made in the sand, the subtle changes in terrain that could conceal an enemy position. He had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan learning to read landscapes like books, and this desert spoke a familiar language of danger and deception. The formation included 2 machine gunners, a communications specialist, a demolitions expert, and a field medic. Each man was cross-trained in multiple specialties, capable of assuming any role if circumstances demanded. They represented the pinnacle of American military training, forged through years of conditioning that broke down civilian minds and rebuilt them into instruments of precision warfare. But even the most elite soldiers were still human. They felt the weight of exhaustion after days of constant movement. They noticed the way their water supplies dwindled despite careful rationing. They felt the psychological pressure of isolation, the way the endless expanse of nothing could make a man question his own sanity. The desert had a way of stripping away illusions and revealing what lay beneath the surface of even the most hardened warriors. Corporal Tommy Williams, at 19 the team's youngest member, struggled more than the others. His Brooklyn accent seemed out of place in this ancient landscape, and his nervous energy contrasted sharply with the veteran composure of his teammates. He had excelled in every phase of SEAL training, graduating near the top of his class, but something about this exercise felt different, more personal, more real. The weight of his gear seemed heavier today, and the endless horizon created a claustrophobic feeling that defied all logic. The communications equipment crackled with static as Petty Officer First Class Robert Chen attempted to establish contact with base command. The radio waves seemed to die in the superheated air, absorbed by the vast emptiness that surrounded them. They were truly alone out here, dependent entirely on their own skills and each other for survival. Chen's technical background included advanced degrees in electrical engineering, but even his expertise couldn't overcome the desert's natural interference. Or so he told himself. The static had a quality to it that felt wrong somehow, but he pushed the thought aside. Tensions had been building throughout the exercise. Small disagreements about navigation, water conservation, and tactical procedures had escalated into heated arguments. The stress of the environment combined with sleep deprivation and the constant pressure to perform had worn away the usual military courtesy. Even elite units had breaking points, and 6 days in hell would test anyone's limits. Thompson sensed the undercurrents of conflict within his team. Rodriguez questioned every decision, his sniper's paranoia making him suspicious of even routine orders. Morrison's youth made him eager to prove himself, sometimes at the expense of sound judgment. Chen's technical expertise was unquestioned, but his impatience with less educated teammates created friction. Williams seemed overwhelmed by the entire experience, his confidence shaken by the brutal realities of special operations training. The medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Daniel Foster, watched his teammates with professional concern. Dehydration, exhaustion, and stress could compromise decision-making as effectively as enemy fire. He carried medications to treat everything from heat stroke to gunshot wounds, but the most dangerous injuries in this environment were often psychological. Foster had seen strong men break under pressure less severe than what they faced here. Machine Gunner Petty Officer First Class Stephen Parker had been unusually quiet for the past 2 days. The 28-year-old from Texas normally kept morale high with his crude humor and endless stories. But something had changed. He moved mechanically now, his usual swagger replaced by grim determination. The desert had a way of forcing men to confront their own mortality, and Parker seemed to be wrestling with demons that went beyond simple fatigue. The other machine gunner, Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Garcia, carried the team's heaviest weapon with apparent ease. His massive frame and quiet demeanor made him a natural anchor for the squad, but even he showed signs of strain. Sweat stained his uniform despite the cooling garments worn beneath, and his breathing had become labored over the past hour. Garcia had grown up in similar terrain in New Mexico, but civilian familiarity proved different from military operations. The desert didn't care what you thought you knew about it. As they crested a low ridge, the extraction point came into view, a flat stretch of hardpan desert marked with orange panels visible even from this distance. It looked like salvation itself. One more kilometer, one more hour of movement through terrain that had tested every aspect of their training. Thompson felt a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. They had accomplished their mission without losing anyone, without compromising their operational security, without failure. Then the crack of a high-powered rifle shattered the afternoon silence like lightning splitting a cloudless sky. Morrison stumbled, his weapon clattering to the ground as crimson spread across his desert camouflage uniform. The young SEAL looked down at his chest in confusion, as if unable to process what had happened. Blood, bright red and unmistakably real, soaked through the fabric and dripped onto the white sand below. His training had prepared him for many things, but the reality of being shot struck him with primal shock that bypassed all conditioning. Contact, contact. Thompson's voice cut through the moment like a blade, sharp and clear. Training kicked in, overriding the paralysis that gripped the team for that single frozen instant. But as 7 pairs of eyes swept the surrounding landscape, they found nothing, no muzzle flash, no movement, no target to engage. The desert seemed to have swallowed their attacker whole. Where is he? Rodriguez's sniper scope swept across the terrain with desperate precision. His trained eye, capable of spotting targets at over 800 meters, found only empty desert. Rock outcroppings that could hide a shooter, ravines that could conceal an entire squad, but no visible enemy. The professional frustration ate at him like acid. Morrison collapsed to his knees, his hand pressed against the wound in his chest. Foster moved immediately, medical training overriding tactical concerns. The bullet had passed through the upper right portion of the torso, missing vital organs, but causing significant blood loss. Real blood, real wound. This was no training exercise. The medic's hands worked automatically while his mind processed the implications. Live ammunition. Hostile fire. In the middle of what was supposed to be a controlled training environment 50 miles from the nearest civilian population, sound off positions, Thompson barked, his command voice carrying across the barren landscape. The responses came back negative. No visual contact. No movement. No indication of where the shot had originated. Each negative report heightened the sense of vulnerability that gripped the team like a vice. The desert around them remained perfectly still, as if the violence had been absorbed into the very air itself. Heat waves continued their eternal dance above the sand. Shadows fell in the same patterns they had moments before. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. The psychological impact of an invisible threat transformed familiar terrain into alien landscape. Every rock became a potential hiding place. Every depression in the ground could conceal a sniper. Every shadow might hide death itself. Chen's radio erupted with static as he attempted to call for immediate extraction. But the signal died in electronic silence, swallowed by the same emptiness that had hidden their attacker. They were alone with an invisible enemy, in a place where sound traveled for miles and cover existed only in scattered patches of rock and sand. Rodriguez made the professional assessment that chilled every man present. Single shot, center mass, range unknown. This isn't random. This is professional. His voice carried the weight of experience gained through 3 combat deployments and countless engagements with skilled adversaries. The words hung in the superheated air like a death sentence. Somewhere in the endless expanse of desert, a skilled marksman had them in his sights. He had demonstrated his ability to place accurate fire at an unknown distance. He had chosen his moment perfectly, waiting until they were exposed on open ground with nowhere to run. Professional snipers understood patience, and this one had displayed the discipline of a master. Thompson's mind raced through tactical options. Immediate action drills called for movement to cover, suppressive fire, and coordinated assault on the enemy position. But those procedures required knowing where the enemy was located. In this vast emptiness, the shooter could be anywhere within a 1,000-meter radius. Standard doctrine seemed inadequate against an adversary who controlled every aspect of the engagement. Minutes passed like hours as the SEALs maintained their defensive positions, sweat mixing with sand to form a gritty paste that stung their eyes and made breathing difficult. The psychological pressure of being hunted by an invisible enemy proved as exhausting as physical exertion. Each man fought his own internal battle against rising panic. Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. The angle of Morrison's wound suggested the shot had come from elevated terrain to their north, but careful examination of that sector revealed only low hills and scattered rock formations, nothing that should have provided a viable shooting position for the range and accuracy they had witnessed. The implications suggested either exceptional skill or intimate knowledge of ballistic principles that went beyond basic marksmanship. The sniper's professional assessment became increasingly grim. Their attacker possessed exceptional skill, excellent equipment, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. This was not a crime of opportunity or a case of mistaken identity. Someone had planned this engagement carefully, selecting the perfect location and timing for maximum effect. The level of preparation indicated resources and expertise that exceeded casual capability. Chen's repeated attempts to establish radio contact met with electronic silence. Either their communications equipment had suffered catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment, or someone was actively jamming their frequencies. Both possibilities suggested a level of sophistication that transformed their situation from tactical problem to strategic nightmare. Professional electronic warfare required specialized equipment and training that put it well beyond the reach of random criminals or civilian threats. Thompson made the decision that would define his leadership. They would move as a team toward the extraction point, using whatever cover the terrain provided while maintaining security in all directions. Staying in place invited additional casualties. Movement created risk, but also opportunity. Leadership in combat meant accepting responsibility for decisions that carried life and death consequences. We'll move in two-man teams bounding Overwatch. Rodriguez, your rear security. Parker Garcia, suppressive fire on my command. Chen, keep trying that radio. Foster, stabilize Morrison for movement. The formation that began moving across the desert bore little resemblance to the confident team that had approached the extraction point 30 minutes earlier. Morrison, though stabilized, required constant medical attention. The other 6 men moved with the hypervigilance of prey animals, knowing that each step could trigger another shot from their invisible hunter. Parker's machine gun swept constantly from side to side, his eyes burning from the combination of sweat and reflected sunlight. The weapon that had seemed so powerful during training exercises now felt inadequate against an enemy who could strike without warning from concealed positions. Automatic weapons required visible targets to achieve maximum effectiveness. Garcia found himself questioning every shadow, every rock formation, every subtle change in the color of sand. His massive frame, normally an asset in close combat, now felt like a liability. Size made him a better target for a skilled marksman who had already demonstrated deadly accuracy at unknown range. William struggled to control the fear that threatened to overwhelm his training. The desert around them had transformed from challenging environment to active threat. Every grain of sand seemed to whisper warnings. Every breath of wind carried the promise of death. His youth, which had seemed like a disadvantage among experienced veterans, now provided reserves of energy that older men might lack. Foster divided his attention between monitoring Morrison's condition and scanning for additional threats. The medic's training emphasized preserving life, but in this situation, survival depended on identifying and neutralizing the enemy before he could strike again. Military medicine in combat zones required different protocols than civilian emergency care. Rodriguez moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, his sniper instincts fully engaged. But instead of hunting, he found himself being hunted by someone who might possess superior skills and certainly enjoyed superior position. The role reversal created a psychological pressure that few snipers ever experienced. Professional hunters rarely became prey. Chen continued his attempts to establish communications, but the electronic silence remained absolute. Without radio contact, they couldn't call for support, couldn't coordinate with friendly forces, couldn't even confirm their own position to potential rescue teams. Technical expertise meant nothing without functional equipment. The extraction point, which had seemed so close before the first shot, now appeared impossibly distant. Every step forward required careful consideration of exposure, concealment, and fields of fire. Progress measured in meters felt like movement across continents. Time had become as much an enemy as the hidden marksman. Thompson's leadership was tested by circumstances no training exercise could simulate. His men looked to him for guidance, but the enemy's tactical advantage seemed insurmountable. In this place, where the desert itself seemed allied against them, traditional military doctrine provided few answers. Innovation and adaptation might prove more valuable than textbook procedures. The sun continued its relentless assault from above, while sand reflected heat upward from below. Dehydration combined with adrenaline to create a cocktail of physical and psychological stress that compromised judgment. In combat, mental errors killed as efficiently as enemy bullets. Maintaining cognitive function under extreme stress separated elite operators from conventional forces, or so the training manuals claimed. Out here, with Morrison bleeding and an invisible enemy stalking them, those distinctions felt meaningless. Morrison's wound, though not immediately life-threatening, required medical evacuation within hours. Blood loss and shock would eventually incapacitate him completely if professional medical care wasn't available. Time was becoming as deadly an enemy as the hidden marksman. Foster's field medicine could only accomplish so much with limited resources and hostile conditions. The silence that followed the gunshot proved more unnerving than the violence itself. It suggested patience on the part of their attacker, confidence that he could afford to wait for the perfect second shot. Professional snipers understood that psychological pressure often achieved more than additional bullets. Fear could be as effective as firepower in achieving tactical objectives. Rodriguez spotted something that made his pulse quicken. A subtle disturbance in the sand near a distant ridge, barely visible even through his high-powered scope. It could have been a wind pattern, a thermal effect, or animal movement. But it could also have been their enemy shifting position for a better angle of attack. His training emphasized the importance of reading terrain like a tactical map. Every fold in the ground, every change in elevation, every shadow cast by rock or vegetation could conceal threats or provide opportunities. In this desert landscape, the analysis became infinitely complex. Natural camouflage exceeded anything human technology could produce. Parker noticed that certain areas of apparently level ground actually provided excellent concealment when viewed from specific angles. The desert's visual tricks, which had seemed merely inconvenient during the approach march, now represented potential death traps where enemies could remain hidden until the moment of attack. Garcia's massive frame required different tactical considerations than his smaller teammates. Cover that protected average-sized soldiers left him partially exposed. Movement patterns that worked for others made him vulnerable to accurate fire from concealed positions. Size advantages in close combat became liabilities against precision marksmen. Williams found himself remembering stories older SEALs had told about Vietnam, about invisible enemies who could strike without warning and disappear like ghosts. Those stories, which had seemed like exaggerations during training, now felt like prophecies coming true in the American desert. History repeated itself in unexpected locations. Foster continued monitoring Morrison's vital signs while maintaining awareness of their tactical situation. The medic's dual responsibilities created constant tension between immediate medical needs and long-term survival requirements. Prioritizing competing demands tested professional judgment under extreme stress. Chen's frustration with the communications blackout grew with each failed attempt to establish contact. Without radio support, they were operating blind in hostile territory with no possibility of reinforcement or extraction. Technical solutions required functional equipment, and jamming represented sophisticated countermeasures that shouldn't exist in a training environment. The team's water supplies, carefully calculated for the original mission profile, now seemed inadequate for an extended engagement. Combat operations in desert conditions consumed fluids at accelerated rates, and stress multiplied the effects of dehydration. Survival planning had to account for contingencies that exceeded normal parameters. Thompson recognized that time favored their enemy. The longer they remained exposed in open terrain, the more opportunities their attacker would have to engage them at ranges and angles of his choosing. Movement toward the extraction point represented their only realistic chance of survival, despite the obvious risks. Rodriguez made a tactical assessment that changed everything. The shooter's position, based on wound ballistics and trajectory analysis, had to be within a specific sector of terrain to their northwest. The area contained numerous potential hiding places, but careful observation might reveal movement or equipment that would betray the enemy's location. Through his scope, the sniper began methodical examination of every rock formation, every shadow, every deviation from the natural pattern of the landscape. Somewhere in that maze of stone and sand, a skilled marksman waited with the patience of a predator for his next opportunity to strike. Parker and Garcia positioned their machine guns to provide overlapping fields of fire across the suspected enemy sector. If they could force the shooter to move or reveal his position, concentrated automatic weapons fire might neutralize the threat despite the range and concealment advantages. Suppressive fire could achieve tactical objectives, even without confirmed targets. Williams found his role shifting from rookie team member to critical component of their survival strategy. His young eyes, less strained by years of combat exposure, might spot details that escaped his more experienced teammates. The desert's attempt to hide its secrets could be defeated by careful observation and patient analysis. Foster balanced medical priorities against tactical necessities, knowing that Morrison's condition would deteriorate regardless of immediate care if they couldn't neutralize the threat and reach extraction. Sometimes the best medicine was superior firepower applied with surgical precision. Chen continued working on communications while analyzing their electronic warfare situation. Professional jammers required sophisticated equipment and considerable electrical power. Their enemy possessed resources that suggested military or paramilitary background. Electronic countermeasures indicated capabilities beyond casual criminal activity. The extraction point remained tantalizingly close, yet impossibly distant. Each meter of forward progress required coordination between 7 men while maintaining security in all directions. Movement that should have taken minutes now consumed precious hours as shadows began growing longer and temperature started its evening decline. Thompson's command decisions carried life and death consequences for every member of his team. In this desert crucible, leadership meant accepting responsibility for outcomes that might exceed human control. The weight of that burden pressed down harder than the desert sun ever could. Then Rodriguez spotted movement. Subtle, barely perceptible, but definitely human. A slight displacement of sand near a rock outcropping 800 meters to the northwest. The target appeared to be adjusting position, possibly preparing for a second engagement. Professional snipers rarely remained in the same location after successful shots. The sniper's training took over as muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Range estimation, wind calculation, target movement prediction. All the skills developed through years of practice focused on a single objective, eliminating the threat before it could strike again. But as Rodriguez prepared to engage, something stopped him. The movement pattern seemed wrong somehow. Too obvious for a skilled marksman who had demonstrated superior fieldcraft. Professional snipers didn't reveal themselves accidentally after successful engagements. The display might represent deception rather than opportunity. Hold fire, he whispered into his comm. Something's not right. Parker felt the familiar weight of his machine gun as he traversed toward the suspected enemy position. The weapon could deliver devastating firepower at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, but accuracy depended on visible targets. In this engagement, even confirming the enemy's presence proved challenging. Garcia's position provided a different angle of observation, and through careful scanning, he noticed something his teammates had missed: fresh tire tracks in a wash that cut through the desert floor. Barely visible, but definitely recent. Someone had used vehicular transport to reach this remote location. The implication suggested planning and resources that exceeded individual capability. Williams's young eyes caught a reflection of sunlight off metal or glass from a position slightly different from where Rodriguez had observed movement. Either there were multiple enemies, or their single adversary was more mobile than anticipated. Professional assessment required consideration of all possibilities. Foster realized that Morrison's wound, while not immediately fatal, followed a trajectory that suggested deliberate shot placement. A skilled marksman could easily have achieved a kill shot at that range. The non-fatal wound might have been intentional, designed to slow their movement and create tactical complications. Chen's analysis of their communications blackout revealed selective jamming across military frequencies, while civilian bands remained clear. This level of sophistication indicated access to specialized electronic warfare equipment, typically available only to government agencies or well-funded organizations. The kind of equipment that shouldn't exist out here. The desert around them remained perfectly silent, except for the whisper of wind across sand and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Nature continued its eternal patterns, while human conflict played out against the backdrop of geological time. The contrast between natural peace and human violence created a surreal atmosphere that felt dreamlike in its intensity. Thompson made the tactical decision that would define the remainder of their engagement. They would advance in bounds toward the extraction point, while Rodriguez provided overwatch with his sniper rifle. If the enemy revealed himself for a second shot, the CL sniper would be ready to respond with professional precision. Man teams, 50-meter bounds. On my mark. The formation began moving across terrain that offered minimal concealment, but remained their only route to safety. Each man carried the weight of knowing that survival depended on teamwork, training, and perhaps a measure of luck that seemed in short supply. Rodriguez settled into his shooting position with the calm precision of a master craftsman. His rifle, zeroed for conditions exactly like these, represented the culmination of American weapons technology and human skill. If their enemy showed himself, the response would be swift and final. Parker's machine gun swept the suspected enemy sector with mechanical precision while Garcia covered their rear. The two weapons represented enough firepower to suppress an entire squad, but their effectiveness depended on having something to shoot at. Williams found himself assigned to close protection for Morrison and Foster, a responsibility that made him acutely aware of his teammates' vulnerability. The young CL's nervousness transformed into focused determination as training overcame fear. Foster monitored Morrison's condition while preparing for the possibility of additional casualties. Desert medicine required different considerations than urban emergency care, and the medic's experience would be tested by circumstances no textbook could adequately describe. Chen maintained his efforts to establish communications while analyzing the electronic warfare environment for weaknesses that might be exploited. Military radios incorporated sophisticated encryption and frequency hopping capabilities, but jamming technology had evolved to counter these defenses. The sun's angle changed as afternoon progressed toward evening, altering shadows and thermal patterns across the desert floor. Light conditions that had favored concealment began shifting in ways that might reveal hidden positions or create new vulnerabilities. Thompson's leadership was tested by the need to balance multiple priorities simultaneously: medical evacuation, tactical movement, threat assessment, and team morale all required attention while operating under the constant pressure of enemy observation. Then Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through his scope, he observed evidence of multiple shooting positions prepared in advance: camouflaged hides, pre-positioned equipment, fields of fire carefully calculated to cover the most likely approach routes. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or chance encounter. Someone had planned this engagement carefully, selecting terrain that maximized their advantages while minimizing escape routes. The implications of pre-planned positions suggested their enemy possessed detailed knowledge of SEAL training exercises, including routes, timing, and operational procedures. This level of intelligence could only come from someone with intimate familiarity with military operations. Security breaches had far-reaching implications that went beyond immediate survival. Parker's tactical assessment revealed that their enemy had achieved perfect ambush positioning. Multiple prepared sites provided overlapping fields of fire while offering concealed withdrawal routes. Professional military doctrine couldn't have improved the setup. The enemy demonstrated tactical expertise equivalent to their own. Garcia recognized terrain features that indicated long-term surveillance of their approach routes. Certain areas showed signs of recent human presence, including camouflaged observation posts that had been occupied for extended periods. Professional preparation required significant time investment, days or weeks of advance work. Williams spotted something his more experienced teammates had missed due to their focus on immediate threats: personal equipment abandoned in one of the observation posts, including items that appeared to be American military issue. The implications challenged fundamental assumptions about their enemy's identity. Foster's medical evaluation of Morrison's wound revealed troubling details about the ammunition used. Ballistic characteristics suggested specialized sniper rounds designed for maximum accuracy and terminal effect. This wasn't standard hunting or sporting ammunition. Professional equipment indicated professional capability. Chen's technical analysis of their communications blackout indicated jamming equipment positioned at multiple locations around their area of operations. The electronic warfare setup required coordination between several operators using sophisticated gear. Professional countermeasures exceeded individual capability by a considerable margin. The extraction point remained their only realistic destination, but the route now appeared to be perfectly covered by enemy fire. Someone had anticipated their movement and prepared accordingly, transforming what should have been a simple withdrawal into a deadly gauntlet. Thompson realized that conventional tactical responses might prove inadequate against an enemy who had achieved such complete preparation. Standard procedures assumed certain limitations on enemy capabilities that clearly didn't apply in this situation. Innovation might prove more valuable than doctrine. Rodriguez made a professional assessment that changed everything they thought they knew about their situation. The shooting positions, the equipment indicators, the tactical setup, all of it suggested their enemy was not foreign hostile, but American military or former military personnel. The sniper scope revealed details that painted a disturbing picture. Camouflage patterns following U.S. military specifications. Equipment types matching standard issue gear. Tactical procedures that mirrored their own training. They weren't facing foreign enemies or criminal opportunists. They were facing someone trained by the same system that had produced them. Thompson, Rodriguez said quietly over the comm, his voice tight with controlled tension. You need to see this. Parker's machine gun training emphasized target identification procedures designed to prevent fratricide incidents. But in this situation, the enemy's equipment and tactics made positive identification nearly impossible until engagement ranges, where mistakes became fatal. Garcia noticed that certain positions had been prepared with intimate knowledge of SEAL movement patterns and communication procedures. Only someone with extensive special operations background could have achieved such tactical precision. Williams felt the psychological impact of facing an enemy who knew their training, their equipment, and their standard operating procedures. Fighting foreign adversaries was challenging enough without the additional complication of facing a mirror image of themselves. Foster realized that Morrison's wound pattern suggested the shooter had deliberately chosen a non-fatal hit zone. A skilled marksman with military training could easily have achieved a kill shot at that range. The wound might have been intended to slow their movement rather than eliminate them immediately. Chen's analysis of the electronic warfare situation revealed jamming techniques that followed American military doctrine for communications denial. Their enemy wasn't just using military equipment, they were applying it according to United States tactical procedures. The desert around them took on a different character as the implications became clear. This wasn't foreign soil where enemies might be expected. This was American territory, and the presence of hostile forces raised questions that extended far beyond immediate survival. Questions about loyalty, about betrayal, about what could turn American soldiers against their own. Thompson faced a command decision that military training hadn't adequately prepared him for. Engaging American personnel, even hostile ones, required different considerations than fighting foreign enemies. Rules of engagement became infinitely more complex when the enemy might be wearing the same uniform you'd worn yourself. Rodriguez struggled with the psychological impact of potentially facing former comrades in arms. Sniper training emphasized compartmentalization, turning targets into objects rather than people. But that mental conditioning failed when applied to American military personnel. The formation continued its careful advance toward the extraction point while each man processed the implications of their situation. They were elite warriors trained to face any enemy, but facing themselves proved to be the ultimate test of their training and resolve. Parker's machine gun remained trained on suspected enemy positions, but his finger hesitated on the trigger in ways it never had before. Military discipline demanded immediate response to hostile fire, but uncertainty about target identification created psychological barriers that could prove fatal. Garcia found himself questioning everything they had been told about this training exercise: the remote location, the communications blackout, the sophisticated enemy preparation. All of it suggested a scenario that exceeded the parameters of normal military training. Williams's youth provided a different perspective on their situation. Without years of conditioning that might create hesitation about engaging American targets, he remained focused on immediate survival without the psychological complications affecting his teammates. But even he felt the weight of what Rodriguez had discovered. Foster continued medical care for Morrison while processing the disturbing implications of their tactical situation. Military medicine included protocols for treating friendly casualties, but those procedures assumed clear identification of friendly versus hostile forces. Chen's technical expertise revealed that their communications had been severed using equipment and techniques that required intimate knowledge of American military systems. Their enemy possessed capabilities that suggested access to classified information and restricted technology, the kind of access that required security clearances and official authorization. The extraction point grew larger in their field of vision, but reaching it required crossing open ground that would expose them to fire from multiple prepared positions. Someone had planned this engagement to culminate in a final confrontation where tactical advantages would be decisive. Thompson realized that survival might depend on abandoning standard procedures and improvising responses that their enemy wouldn't anticipate. Conventional tactics had failed because their opponent knew those tactics as well as they did. Better than they did, perhaps, given the level of preparation they'd achieved. Rodriguez made a decision that reflected years of sniper training and combat experience. He would engage any target that presented itself, regardless of nationality or background. In combat, hesitation killed. Professional warriors couldn't afford the luxury of political considerations when bullets were flying. The sun continued its relentless journey across the desert sky while shadows grew longer and temperatures began their evening decline. Time favored their enemy, who had prepared positions and could afford to wait for perfect opportunities. Parker noticed movement in his peripheral vision that suggested their enemy might be repositioning for better angles of attack. Multiple prepared positions provided tactical flexibility that conventional defensive doctrine couldn't easily counter. Garcia's observation revealed fresh sign that indicated recent activity by multiple individuals. Their enemy wasn't a single shooter, but a coordinated team with sophisticated planning and preparation. The implications multiplied the threat by an order of magnitude. Williams spotted something that made his pulse quicken: a reflection of sunlight off optical equipment from a position that hadn't shown previous activity. Their enemy was actively observing their movement and adjusting accordingly. Foster realized that immediate medical evacuation for Morrison was becoming a secondary priority behind team survival. Desert conditions would eventually claim all of them. If they couldn't neutralize the threat and reach the extraction point, Chen's continued analysis of their communication situation revealed that jamming was being adjusted in real time to counter their attempts at establishing contact. Their enemy possessed both sophisticated equipment and operators skilled in electronic warfare. Professional electronic warfare operators with military training and current equipment. The extraction point lay only 400 meters ahead, but that distance might as well have been 4,000. Open ground stretched between their current position and safety, covered by enemy fire from concealed positions that offered no viable approach routes. Thompson faced the ultimate leadership challenge: getting his team across ground that appeared tactically impossible while carrying a wounded man and facing an enemy who knew their capabilities intimately. Rodriguez settled into his final shooting position with the grim determination of a professional warrior. His scope swept across terrain that might conceal multiple threats, searching for the target that would define the engagement's outcome. The desert wind picked up as evening approached, carrying sand that stung exposed skin and reduced visibility. Natural conditions that had seemed manageable during their approach now created additional complications for both offense and defense. Parker's machine gun was positioned to provide suppressive fire across the suspected enemy positions, but effective suppression required visible targets. In this engagement, even confirming enemy presence proved challenging until muzzle flashes revealed positions. Garcia prepared for movement across open ground that would test every aspect of their training. The machine gunner's role was to provide covering fire for his teammates' advance, but the mission might require him to abandon heavy weapons for speed and mobility. Williams found himself assigned the critical task of assisting Morrison during the final movement to extraction. The wounded CL's condition was stable, but would deteriorate rapidly if subjected to additional stress or blood loss. Foster prepared his medical kit for emergency treatment while maintaining awareness of tactical requirements. Desert medicine in combat conditions required different protocols than peacetime emergency care, protocols he was about to test under the worst possible circumstances. Chen made one final attempt to establish communications with any friendly forces that might be monitoring their frequencies. Electronic silence might mean equipment failure, jamming, or complete isolation from support. Or it might mean something worse, that whoever was jamming them had the authority to keep rescue forces at bay. The moment of decision arrived as shadows began lengthening across the desert floor. Thompson raised his hand, the signal that would init their final movement toward extraction and whatever waited there. Rodriguez pressed his cheek against the rifle stock, his eye finding the familiar comfort of the scope's view. Somewhere in that maze of rock and sand, an enemy waited with patience and skill that matched his own. "Execute," Thompson said quietly. The formation began moving across ground that offered no concealment and little cover. Each step forward represented a calculated risk that survival would depend on speed, surprise, and superior marksmanship if contact was inevitable. Parker's machine gun swept from side to side as he moved, ready to deliver devastating firepower the moment targets presented themselves. The weapon that had seemed so powerful during training now felt like cold comfort against an enemy who controlled the terms of engagement. Garcia carried his heavy weapon with fluid grace despite the weight and awkwardness. His massive frame, which had been a liability during concealed movement, now became an asset as he prepared to lay down suppressive fire that could turn the tide of battle. Williams helped Morrison maintain forward momentum while scanning for threats that could emerge from any direction. The young SEAL's nervousness had transformed into focused determination as training overcame fear. Foster monitored Morrison's condition while preparing for the possibility that immediate medical attention might be required under fire. Combat medicine required different skills than peacetime emergency care, skills he'd trained for but never wanted to use. Chen continued attempting to establish communications while analyzing their electronic environment for any weakness that might be exploited. Military radios incorporated sophisticated capabilities, but jamming technology had evolved to counter these defenses. The extraction point grew larger with each forward step, but so did the sense of impending confrontation. Someone had planned this engagement to culminate in a final battle, where preparation would prove more important than courage. Thompson led from the front, accepting the additional risk that command responsibility required. His position made him a prime target, but leadership demanded visible commitment to shared danger. Rodriguez moved with the controlled patience of a master predator, his rifle ready for the shot that might save his teammates' lives. Professional snipers understood that the most important engagement was often the one that prevented additional contact. The desert around them remained eerily quiet, except for the sound of boots on sand and the whisper of wind across stone. Nature continued its eternal patterns while human conflict approached its climax. Then Parker saw it, movement in his peripheral vision, subtle but unmistakable. Contact left, he shouted, even as his machine gun was already traversing toward the threat. Multiple prepared positions were now showing signs of occupancy, suggesting their enemy had been reinforced or had always possessed superior numbers. Garcia spotted movement that confirmed their worst fears. At least 3 separate shooting positions contained hostile personnel, transforming their situation from sniper duel to coordinated ambush. Williams saw the muzzle flash an instant before the second shot shattered the afternoon air. Training kicked in as he threw himself sideways, pulling Morrison clear of the bullet's path. The round impacted sand where they'd been standing a heartbeat before. Foster watched rounds impact the sand in a pattern that suggested multiple shooters engaging simultaneously, creating a complex tactical situation that exceeded their planning assumptions. Chen felt the radio handset disintegrate in his grasp as a bullet found its target with surgical precision. Their enemy had specifically targeted their communications equipment, ensuring continued isolation from support. The extraction point, so close yet impossibly distant, became the focus of desperate movement as 7 SEALs fought for survival against an enemy who had achieved every tactical advantage. "Move! Move! Move!" Thompson's command voice cut through the chaos of gunfire and flying sand, galvanizing his team into coordinated action despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Rodriguez found his target as a muzzle flash revealed an enemy position. His rifle spoke once, a crack that cut through the chaos like a knife. A distant figure tumbled from concealment, weapon clattering against rock. One threat eliminated, but others remained. The battle was joined in earnest as elite warriors faced enemies who might once have been brothers in arms in the American desert. Far from foreign battlefields, the ultimate test of training and courage played out against a backdrop of sand and stone and blood. Parker's machine gun roared to life as targets finally presented themselves. Concentrated firepower swept across enemy positions, forcing hostile shooters to seek better cover or risk immediate elimination. The mechanical thunder of automatic fire echoed across the desert like the voice of some ancient god of war. Garcia's weapon added its voice to the symphony of violence, as overlapping fields of fire began to neutralize the enemy's tactical advantages. Superior firepower might overcome superior position if applied with precision and persistence. Williams helped Morrison reach the extraction point's perimeter while maintaining security against threats that could emerge from any direction. The wounded SEAL's condition remained stable despite the chaos surrounding them, a testament to Foster's field medicine and Williams's courage under fire. Foster prepared emergency medical equipment while providing covering fire with his sidearm. Military medicine in combat conditions required multitasking capabilities that few civilian doctors could comprehend. Treating patients while engaging enemies simultaneously demanded a special kind of focus. Chen worked frantically to establish communications using backup equipment while analyzing the tactical situation for weaknesses that might be exploited. Electronic warfare had evolved into a critical component of modern combat, and he was fighting that battle even as bullets cracked overhead. The extraction point offered limited cover, but represented their only realistic chance of survival. Reaching it required crossing the final 50 meters of open ground, while hostile fire converged from multiple directions. Thompson led the final push with the courage that had made him a SEAL leader. His rifle fired carefully aimed shots at enemy positions while his voice coordinated team movement across lethal terrain. "Covering fire! Move on my mark." Rodriguez engaged multiple targets as enemy positions revealed themselves through muzzle flashes and movement. Each shot was calculated to neutralize threats while conserving ammunition for the prolonged engagement that seemed inevitable. The desert battlefield erupted in violence as suppressed tensions exploded into open warfare. American military technology and training faced themselves in a confrontation that revealed the true cost of elite warrior conditioning. Parker's machine guns swept enemy positions with mechanical precision while Garcia provided flanking fire from an alternate angle. Coordinated automatic weapons fire began to overcome the enemy's advantages of position and preparation. Williams demonstrated courage that exceeded his years as he exposed himself to enemy fire while helping Morrison reach safety. The young SEAL's actions proved that heroism was measured in moments of decision rather than years of experience. Foster reached the extraction point and began establishing a casualty collection area while maintaining defensive fire against continuing threats. Military medicine required treating patients while engaging enemies, a reality he was living in real time. Chen established communications with extraction forces while coordinating defensive fires against enemy positions. Electronic warfare skills proved as valuable as marksmanship in determining the engagement's outcome. The battle reached its climax as SEAL training and equipment proved superior to enemy preparation and positioning. Professional warriors, regardless of their loyalties, respected the outcome that superior tactics and teamwork achieved. Thompson's leadership held his team together during the most challenging engagement of their careers. Command responsibility in combat meant accepting accountability for outcomes that exceeded individual control, a burden he carried without hesitation. Rodriguez delivered the precise shots that eliminated the most dangerous enemy threats while preserving his teammates' lives. Sniper skills developed through years of training proved decisive when applied with surgical precision. The extraction point became a fortress as SEAL defensive procedures created interlocking fields of fire that dominated the surrounding terrain. Military doctrine properly applied overcame even sophisticated enemy preparation. Parker and Garcia's machine guns provided the sustained firepower that forced enemy withdrawal from prepared positions. Automatic weapons, skillfully employed, could overcome almost any tactical disadvantage. Williams proved that courage was not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. His performance under fire earned the respect of veterans who had initially questioned his readiness for special operations. Foster's medical skills preserved Morrison's life, while his combat training contributed to the team's tactical success. Military medicine required warriors who could heal and fight simultaneously, a dual capability he'd mastered. Chen's technical expertise restored communications and coordinated the support that transformed tactical engagement into strategic victory. Electronic warfare capabilities had become as important as traditional weapons in modern combat. The enemy withdrawal left behind equipment and intelligence that revealed the disturbing truth about their attackers' identity and motivation. American military personnel, operating on American soil, engaging United States forces in deadly combat. Thompson faced the sobering reality that their training exercise had become something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. Elite warriors had been tested not just by foreign enemies, but by the possibility that their own system could produce adversaries. Rodriguez examined enemy equipment that confirmed his worst suspicions about their attackers' background and training. Professional soldiers, regardless of their current loyalties, left distinctive signatures that revealed their origins. Standard issue gear, American tactical procedures, the kind of preparation that only came from within the system itself. The extraction helicopters arrived as scheduled, but they carried away a team that had been transformed by combat against enemies they never expected to face. The desert had tested them in ways that no training scenario could simulate. Parker and Garcia secured the battlefield while processing the psychological impact of engaging American personnel who had turned their training against former comrades. Professional warriors understood that enemies could emerge from unexpected sources, but understanding didn't make it easier to accept. Williams earned his place among elite operators through performance under fire that exceeded all expectations. Youth and inexperience had been overcome by courage and competence when those qualities mattered most. Foster's medical report documented wounds that would heal, but the psychological injuries might prove more challenging to treat. Combat medicine included responsibilities that extended beyond physical trauma, responsibilities he was only beginning to understand. Chen's technical analysis provided intelligence that would require investigation by agencies equipped to handle the complex questions their engagement had raised. Electronic warfare evidence suggested conspiracy at levels that exceeded local military authority. The desert retained its secrets as sand began covering the signs of human conflict. Wind and time would erase the evidence, but the memories would remain with those who had survived. Morrison recovered from his wounds, but carried scars that served as permanent reminders of the day American warriors faced enemies who knew their training because they had received identical instruction. The extraction point became a reference coordinate for questions that would challenge military investigators for years to come. How had elite personnel turned against their own system? What had motivated such desperate action? Thompson's after-action report documented events that required classification levels beyond normal military security. Some truths were too dangerous for public consumption, even in a democracy that valued transparency. Rodriguez returned to his role as sniper instructor, but his teaching now included warnings about threats that could emerge from within the military system itself. Professional warriors had to be prepared for any enemy, even themselves. The team disbanded after extensive debriefing that failed to answer all the questions their engagement had raised. Elite units sometimes uncovered realities that civilian leadership preferred to handle through specialized agencies. Parker and Garcia continued their careers with enhanced understanding of the complexities that could turn training against its intended purpose. Professional soldiers learned to question assumptions about loyalty and motivation. Williams emerged from the desert as a proven warrior whose courage under fire had been tested against the highest possible standards. His performance earned respect from veterans who understood the true measure of combat leadership. Foster expanded his medical training to include psychological counseling techniques for treating warriors who had faced the ultimate betrayal of trust. Combat medicine evolved to address new categories of trauma, the kind that came from fighting your own. Chen developed electronic warfare procedures designed to prevent friendly communications from being compromised by hostile forces using identical equipment. Technical security required constant evolution to match emerging threats. The desert wind continued its eternal patterns, carrying sand that gradually covered the signs of human conflict. In this place where civilizations had risen and fallen, one more chapter of warfare had been written in blood and courage. The extraction point remained marked on classified maps as a reminder of the day elite warriors learned that their greatest enemy might wear familiar uniforms and speak their native language. Some lessons could only be learned through experience that tested the limits of human endurance. Training exercises would never again assume that all threats came from foreign sources. The desert had taught them that democracy's greatest enemies might emerge from within its own institutions, armed with identical training and motivated by grievances that transformed loyalty into lethal opposition. The sand began its work of concealment, but memory preserved what wind and time would erase. In the hearts and minds of those who had survived, the desert would always whisper its warning about the price of vigilance and the cost of freedom. And in the classified files buried deep within Pentagon archives, investigators would spend years trying to understand how American soldiers had turned against their own, and whether the desert ambush was an isolated incident or the first shot in a war that had no clear battle lines. The answers, like so much else in the desert, remained hidden beneath layers of sand and secrecy. But 7 men knew the truth. 7 men who had looked into the face of America's shadow and survived to tell the tale, even if that tale could never be fully told. The desert kept its secrets, but the warriors who had fought there would carry those secrets to their graves, a burden heavier than any equipment they'd ever shouldered across those burning sands.